everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And today I'm joined by writer Andy Bollen to talk about his book, Definitely Maybe, The Birth, Death and Resurrection of Oasis. I've got the book right here. Hello, Andy.
Morning, Alistair. How we get on, all right?
Yeah, really well, thanks. So before we start, I have to say, I don't know what I was expecting. Well, I do know what I was expecting, but this book isn't it. Because I kind of thought with the timing of everything, obviously there's the gigs going on, this would be a kind of history of Oasis to kind of chime with what's going on. But it's not that at all. It's a really personal book. It's very much puts into context the culture of the time. And it kind of all hangs on that infamous night at King Tut's in May 1993 as well. So we'll talk about all those things. But why did you want to write it?
Well, I started writing it about 10 years ago. If you look at my books that I've got out now, there's a big, massive chasm of a gap where that book should have been. And no one would touch the band because they were always a Marmite band.
Yeah.
All the sort of editors, a lot of guys that were into Oasis sort of could see that there would be, like scope for a moment whenever it might happen, but a lot of them wouldn't touch it. So I've been writing it for 10 years. Also, in and out with loads of different updates, and any time there was they got together, because there's a few promises that they might get back together. It was just a case of waiting. But honestly, Alistair, it's almost like a lesson in perseverance and not giving up, and all the cheesy stuff you hear sort of people on YouTube telling you and all that. But it's really true. It's really true, because you just I had it ready to go. And to go back to what your earlier point was, it was just more. One of my friends always says to me, "Oh, I really liked your book, but it's another book about you." And I goes, "Well, it's my point of view. It's about my life during this, and that's why it's called a memoir." That's what I always say to people. That's that, because it was just like the way it was, and I try to explain. And in doing that over sort of texturing up, I think you kind of get a flavour and a feel for what it was like to be there. And as you say, going back to the the night in question and in the moment. And the principle, like two guys leaving King Tut's. This is what I always say to people. It's like two guys are leaving King Tut's, and one goes back to sort of messing about in a band and scratching out a living. Is that writing jokes for the BBC or something? And becoming a civil servant, God forbid, right? And then the other guy walks out and becomes a millionaire twice. We both saw the same band. It's incredible to think that. It's an incredible story that this band, and I felt sorry for them. I really felt sorry for them. And for what to happen to sort of unfold was just incredible.
So those two people you're talking about, I'm guessing, is yourself, obviously, and
Alan McGee. Yeah.
Yeah. So the structure of the book's fascinating. You've got, I think, 5 chapters on that night at King Tut's. You do describe it later on as the kind of Rashomon effect, different points of view. For those who don't know that film, I mean, whether they know it or not, they'll have seen it in other films like Jackie Brown and various others. Different points of view on the same situation.
Exactly.
So, and that kind of reflects that. Well, one, if you had the amount of people that said they were there that night, it would have been, King Tut's would never have been able to take them.
Playing the Barris.
Yeah, exactly. And so, what's your initial memory of being, I think it was a Monday night, wasn't it? Kind of Monday night.
Bank holiday Monday.
Just explain how that night went and where Oasis's part in it was.
Well, to start at the beginning, my friend, Derek McKee, DD, his name is Dale, is a drummer. And I was a drummer in bands, and I fronted another band I had called Boomerang, and we were all friends. We're all from Airdrie. And he invited us in to see this band, his band, and the Telstar Ponies were playing. They were playing in King Tut's. It was the last night, I remember, Mayfest.
I do,
It was the very last night of Mayfest. It was the 31st of May, 1993. And they were on. And this band called Sister Lovers, who had played a show in Manchester with them at the Boardwalk, the famous venue that they had a studio beneath it and a venue above it. And they played the Boardwalk, this band, and they'd come up. They asked if they could come up. So Sister Lovers come up, but they also happened to say to their band, who they shared this rehearsal space with, to sort of goad them a wee bit. Debbie, my friend, she was part of it all. It was her really that accidentally, her and probably Dee Dee and the boyfriend guys that started all this for Oasis. When you think of that's incredible to think that. But anyway, getting back to the point, I do zigzag, but I'll always come back to the point that eventually that night in question, it was they were on, and then they were downstairs and they were trying to get on, but King Tut's didn't have budget to pay for them, so they weren't going to get on. And then they sort of calmed down, and then eventually all the bands cut time and played. So Oasis, this other band, the fourth band in the bill were Oasis, and I went up into the venue, and I was standing. It was Eugene Kelly, mate. Eugene, who was the guy I was in a band with before Captain America. We were going upstairs and having a blether. I mean, we just went in naturally because I've always sort of done it at gigs. I like to see support bands if I go to gigs. I always have a nosy to see because you might be watching the next Beatles, and I was watching this band and I just didn't get it. They come on and it was really quiet. It was me. There was Eugene, me, Al McGee, and Al McGee's sister Susan. There was about 2 or 3 punters spread around that had come up in the van with Oasis.
Yep.
So there was, I think I counted 14. I remember looking around and thinking, this is embarrassing. This is just, and it was so quiet. It was too embarrassing to leave. Always remember there was a Japanese student or a couple, two kids, 2 young people. They were, I mean, I would have been my mid-ish 20s, maybe a bit later than that. But these guys, these were about 18 or 19. I was like, imagine coming all the way from Japan to see this. Actually, that's what it was like. And I thought they were ordinary. I thought they were average. But Al McGee was standing beside me, and he's bouncing up and down, and you could hear him talking to his sister, and I'm sitting Eugene, he's like shrugging his shoulders. We didn't get it. Yeah. We didn't get it. To me, they felt like they were about 18 months too late. It was this, they were loud and they were organised, and the guy who we eventually found out was Noel, the older, he was a leader, but they were tight and they were loud, and the front man was snarly and it looked like he could fight. That's all I would do in my A&R report. In fact, there's a wee bit in the diary, from a diary, because I kept diaries at the time. I'm glad I did now, because I came about. I wrote a book about Nirvana based on my diaries as well, but I had a wee bit, and I took it word for word. In fact, they tried to fix it, and then I said, no, don't change it, just keep it. The people were always trying to say, you look like an idiot, and I goes, no, it's best to be the idiot. It's better. It's more honest if you just say, you know what, I thought they were crap. Yeah. I didn't, in fact, I never ever said I thought they were crap, because I thought they were okay. But sometimes in music or in I mean, if you go to a play or you go to a movie and you say it was all right, that's just if you're part of that, that's just like the worst thing. You want to be, you want it to be special, and you want to have an edge. But later on in the night, Al McGee said, I want to sign you. And he's going, he didn't know who he was. He goes, no, didn't know who he was. He goes, I'm Al McGee for Creation Records. And he said, and no, he's got it. This is before he got his new rock and roll teeth. Yeah. He had this lovely warm smile. He reminded me guys that I grew up with, and guys that I knew. He had that sort of, well-mannered and quite polite. And telling Al McGee, basically he was saying, I mean, he wasn't saying this word for word, but the intent was, calm down. He was telling the boss to calm down. He said, you need to take a tape, because he was buzzing on Jack Daniels and Coke, at least more than that, because he splashed it on my jacket, and I went like, taste it. It was like doubles. I was like, usually doubles and all that. And they were just, but he was going mental. But the third or fourth song, he said, I remember hearing him saying to his sister, I'm going to sign him. And I think his sister was getting fed up with him, and she said, well, if you're going to sign him, shut up. So typical Glasgow. It was really, and this all happened here, and then no one believed me, and then over time, and it's great now in his sobriety, Al McGee, he's very honest now, and he says that. He said, I think his thing was that I went in and he's asked in some of the I think I mentioned it in the book, P asked this sort of big distribution network and sort of production company that do all the stuff a lot across Europe for bands. I mean, they were saying, they did this podcast, and he was just saying, he said, how great were Oasis? Oh, they weren't great. I just thought I could sneak in and steal some of the sales for the Next Door Noses album. That was it. He was maybe thinking 50,000, 100,000. But what I do say to people is, sorry, I do blabber by Babylon. You'll know 2-3 questions, it'll be time for lunch. We're playing cricket now. The cricket was on earlier. So whenever he's there, he's looking and he's thinking, 18 months down, that he's thinking he's no longer like he is the head of Creation, but Creation's also back to the help with Sony, and he's looking at them a different way. He's not looking at them like your classic, indie pastels, BMX Bandits type band. He's looking at them thinking a mainstream rock band that football fans, that women all like, that will start fights. He's had a reputation. He's grown up loving Malcolm McLaren for the Sex Pistols. He's grown up loving the Jesus and Mary Chain, bands that get a reaction and cause chaos. And he loves all that. And he can see that. He can see that, and no one else on the night could see it. In fact, I don't think Oasis himself saw it. It's an incredible story.
There's a fascinating chapter, which we'll hopefully talk about later, called The Lost Art of A&R, and how it wasn't just about the music, it was spotting something else. It was spotting the potential to reach perhaps an audience that other bands couldn't reach. And it's interesting to reflect as well on Alan McGee's Creation pre-Oasis. I think the biggest band you could say was Teenage Fan Club, probably.
Probably. At the start, it would be Jesus and Mary Chain, then it was Primal Scream, I think. Bands like that, yep. But you're right, they were all like maybe at their best, maybe 200,000 peak sort of sales. And then I know it was a different sort of setup at Creation then. But he was
what we could call, what I would think of when I first got into music as indie music. Their stuff would be in the indie charts, in the NME or in the Melody Maker or whatever it might be. And I think perhaps Oasis being on an indie label changed people's perception of what indie music was.
100%. And I think it really was an indie label by default because of the sort of the mechanisms behind it, because they were really, what had happened was to oversimplify something that's quite complex. They had the worldwide, I think Sony had bought, but they had tried to arrange a deal, but they didn't want to use the company over in America that Al McGee used. So they had to sort of come up with a deal, and they ended up licensing to Creation. Sony ended up licensing to Creation, Oasis to Creation, sorry, and that meant that they could sort of still have a wee bit indie kudos, but they were backed up, because during the fight with Blur, the guys at Food are saying they're just as big as us. You've got EMI, but they've got Sony. You know what I mean? It was quite interesting, the stuff behind, the mechanisms behind it all. But in the end, people just want to go and see a rock and roll band, and I think the Creation thing helped them, because as you say, it brought the more indie people into the mainstream. And I've still got friends. I mean, I met a guy out for a walk a couple of days ago, and he stopped his car, and he always talks to me about football and talks to me about politics and everything like that. Here we got a book about Oasis. I effing hate them. and then rolled the window up, gave him the toot and went away. And I was like, I just start laughing. It doesn't bother me. A lot of people think, oh, you must have upset. And you must get upset. But no, because they went from, they are like a mainstream band that have been filtered into a kind of an indie milieu sort of thing, where people are thinking, well, it must be cool because they're on Creation. And then, but at the heart of it, I think people kind of get it, and there's a guttural sort of it's just the way it hits you with Oasis. And I remember that a year later when I saw them after, and I was nearly crying. I know I'm not that emotional about the music and things, but I just wanted them to do well, because I felt sorry for them. I felt like they were my cousins that were in a band, and
it's such an interesting reaction that. But also, I'm thinking how they changed the concept of indie and the careers of lots of other bands.
Yes.
Pop had been releasing music since the 80s.
Yes.
And, they would have been a classic band that would have been on that John Peel session indie chart in the NME, and that would have been as kind of high as they would have got. Then suddenly they're backed by, big money, and completely changes.
Island Records they came from, I think.
Yeah.
So that's a good point.
They kind of that deal that was done on that Monday night kind of changed the music business, certainly in this country.
The deal, sorry, this is one of my pet hates. The deal or the arrangement or the handshake happened that night, but the deal didn't happen until October, and it took an awful lot of legal movements and awful. You never
so that kind of gentleman's agreement, put it that.
Yes, exactly. That's the good way of looking at it. But they agreed, and no, to be fair to no, he's a lot of people think he's like a mouthy and head and all that, but he's actually principled, because they had offers. U2's company came in for them and offered to double the money that Creation had offered them. I think Go Discs came in. There was a few others that were that were kind of sniffing around, but two definite big money offers. They said, no, well, we're going to go. We're going to go with, shook hands with Alan McGee. We're going with Oasis. We're going with Creation, sorry. But it is the sort of the movement and the just the way that how they worked it. And I think I give their manager great credit for his work in the background, what he did and all that. It was just, they were really well looked after. And thank God they were. And I still can't believe they're playing Murrayfield next week or this week. Jeez.
I know, it is quite incredible. You're absolutely right. Just going back to Alan McGee being there, there's lots of lovely little detail throughout the book, Andy. One that springs to mind now is his red shoes that he was wearing, because I think you say he was going out clubbing late
He
that
was.
night.
He was supposed to be going in Italian.
King Tut's was a bit of a stop-off.
He was meeting his sister, and but he also he planned a girl, Debbie, that as a friend, as we were saying earlier, she was in Sister Lovers, and that was whenever he was in his clubbing days in Manchester, they were great pals. And he found out that they were playing that night, and he phoned up the management, because there was two bands called with the same name, two Sister Lovers bands. And when they found out it was hers, he sneaked up. That's the reason why he went.
Right.
He went to wind her up and stand in front and pull like that, because it was only her second or third gig or something. She didn't know how to work her guitar or effects and everything. And then Alan McGee started watching her. She's like, oh. So he just went to Mischief Mate and say hello. And then this band came on and changed his life and their life, our lives, whether we like it or not.
Absolutely, yeah. And going back to the structure of the book and those 5 chapters the same night, is that how they're different perspectives, as we've said, but you're at the centre of all of them, aren't you? So is that people talking to you and giving you their perspective? How did you approach them?
Well, what I did was eventually I knew quite a lot of the people who were involved, as I said, I was in bands at the time, and I knew the promoters, and I knew the sound men, and I knew a lot of the bands and a lot of guys that were there. But a lot of people just simply couldn't remember things. So I thought it was really quite funny. People couldn't remember, and I was like, maybe I wasn't invited to any of the parties. How come nobody can remember this? And then it got to a point where when I thought I would do some real old school sort of journalism. I know I had a notebook. I've got a notebook, and it's just like about 8 or 9 years ago, I sent email. I tracked them all down, all the people, and I said, any chance you can sort of write, just give me a paragraph about what you recall for this night. I'm just really curious, because I'm getting. You need a definitive. Maybe it's me. Maybe they're all right now. Maybe it's me. It's wrong.
Yeah.
You start to doubt yourself, and then I was like, I knew what was going on, right? And I was watching it all, and the other things were coming in, and I thought, how am I going to? Because it's their version of events. How am I going to do it? So no, I did that for the Rashomon one, but the 5 the idea of splitting the King Tut's nights actually came from an idea that I had I've done it before, and I wrote a book about Johan Cruyff, the football legend, the Dutch legend, and in that he did this amazing season for Feyenoord. I went to Feyenoord, and this would be like, just to oversimplify it, this would be like Messi leaving Barcelona to go and sign for Real Madrid. It was like a real huge story, a huge change in club at the very end of his career last season. So, and I told his life story, but every 2 or 3 chapters, there was like maybe 7 or 8 games, and I did that, and it worked, and it really took it. We did well, that book. It sold a lot out in South America and across Europe, and it really sort of, I got an awful lot of good, and everybody responded to the idea of how it was done, almost like a cinematic thing. So I was like, how can I do this with? I'll try that with King Tut's. So I tried to make it more like you're at a movie. But one thing I will say is, there was a film called Supersonic, and I know because one of the people from the production company kept emailing me and asking me, have you got any photographs? And all that. It was 1993. Didn't have mobile phones. He didn't. If he did,
Didn't take cameras to gigs.
Didn't take cameras to gigs. No, you're right to see the band. You're not there, and they were obsessed with this. And I never ever watched it because I was in a huff. I had a wee bit lippy with me, and then he just. So I've never watched it, and then it came on about maybe a month ago on the telly, and I was like, oh God, it was just so much. It was like, obviously it's the same story, but I took back to the point. So I just, for a technical point of view, for a writing point of view, it was a good way to to remind people of how it's like that thing. Don't be afraid to dream. I know it sounds like something out of EastEnders, or it just sounds like it's Hollyoaks or something. But honestly, it's really, really 5 guys trying to get out of a house in the state. Either end up in jail or end up getting into fights or into heavy drugs or into just really 5 guys going for it and trying to live the dream and making it. Do you know, it's an incredible story. So that was my thing. I wanted to get that story across. I wanted to divvy up the don't be afraid to dream. The Night in King Tut's from different sort of point of views.
Yeah.
Watching it as a fan, trying to watch it like an A&R man again, thinking about the people who were there, thinking about the people that claimed to be there. Then there was loads of stuff I left out as well to protect people. But most of the stuff that people told me, there was a couple of people who told me that they couldn't believe it, and Al McGee stage dive and all that. You could do a sitcom. You could.
Because there's a lot of kind of myth and that's grown up around that night. One of them being that Oasis they come up team-handed and there was going to be, it was all kicking off. So, there is a lot of mythology around the night as well, which I guess by showing all these different points of view, you actually get to some kind of truth.
So what happened was there was a couple of big guys there and a couple of guys that were they were there all day in Glasgow, and they had just come up in a minibus from Manchester. They'd saved up something like 200 quid or something to come up. They all put in 20 quid each. I don't know where they put in money each, a tenner each or something. They all come up, and they were all kind of enjoying themselves, put it that way. And they were upsetting a few people who were there working, but they weren't that bad. They weren't that. They thought the band were playing. They didn't know there'd been a mix up. But the actual story evolved once they had signed, or once they were in the process of signing to Creation, and it was their press thing. And that's where that came from. All that stuff. Because when you ask, I get quotes from Ali Murdoch, who was he's the sort of the band manager on the night, and the guy that runs Dance Factory DF events. I quotes for them openly saying he was in Edinburgh and missed it, and it was all quite professionally handed, and ended up the other bands all took time off their sets so they could play. So it was all quite calm and pedestrian. But by the time it came through the indie PR ringer, the same indie PR thing that McGee did for Jesus Mary Chain. Don't forget, he knows how he's doing it.
Yeah. The 8-minute gigs and it all kicked off and all. There was another pair of brothers who were notorious for fighting.
Exactly. That's what we talk about.
Yeah. Just
handling that sort of that excitement, and he liked that. And there was a famous, just to sort of take a wee junction off it, but it goes back to the sort of the violence and the hooliganism and all that. One of their first gigs out was over. They were playing a show in Amsterdam, and they're on the ferry. No goes to bed. The next morning he wakes up and they've all been arrested for fighting with like West Ham fans or something that were going to a game over in the Netherlands or something, right? And Al McGee, he tells Al McGee, and Al McGee just says, "Brilliant," because that's what he wants. Suddenly they're going to be in the front of the papers. It sells. He's that old school. I keep saying that. He reminded me of like a 60s and 70s influencer guys. Like just guys that knew how to get. They were talent spotters, and if you looked apart, they could even get somebody to sing on the record. It didn't matter. It's if you just we want somebody to front the machine, and you look the part. You look like you're game for a fight. So let's just make them. And they're actually. Somebody told me that they're all. And I didn't put this in, but they're all really nice sort of. I did put in the thing that they're all like their mums and dads are all Irish, and they're all like working class Irish guys, and I tried to sort of get a wee bit writery and talk about Noel as a singer, singing sort of songs of revolution and songs or just that sort of a ballad that you can play 3 chords with an acoustic Spanish guitar or something in a wee room somewhere in the back of a pub. And that song can translate into a stadium full of 80,000 people. They're singing every word.
Yeah,
that's a skill. Do you know that's a real skill? But I try to sort of, there's a lot of that sort of rewrite the themes as well as the violence. There's a nice side to them. I try to get, there's a kind of a kindness there as well. You know, they're not total bams.
Because, you know, everyone, of course, focuses on Liam and Noel, but you go into the rest of the band as well, and particularly with you being a drummer, the importance of the drummer.
I thought they lost something in the second. I know it's you know, oh, you can't say that, you can't say that. Noel's always right. I thought they called it wrong. I'd have given him the second chance, but I think he was going backwards whenever everybody else was. Well, he at the start of the band, he was one of the best ones. He's one of the best players in the band.
That's Tony, isn't it?
Tony McCarroll.
Yeah.
And Tony was in the original. He was in Rain as well, the original band before they changed their name. He was there, and see for the. I'm not saying he was a like incredible drummer, but see for the sound that they wanted and they had at that point, the first album, he was the guy for it. It was just a big wall of sound. It was just 4/4. It was just loud, and it was just right here in the front of the mix, and it was good. And even the producers that came in to help and fix it, they were all sitting off. He just get him some lessons and try to get him. But he was, I think he given up. I think him and Noel just didn't. They never hit it off. And once you fall out with the boss, you'd be like, let's show you. The jacket's in a Shukley peg.
I really agree with you. And I think even, you know, perhaps they're the most famous and arguably greatest song, Live Forever. Those drums at the intro, simple, but absolutely grab you right from the start.
Sometimes.
I agree with you about that. And it was like the old argument years ago about Ringo, you know, you're not even the best drummer in the Beatles, as they used to say, but absolute integral part to who the Beatles were.
I know the sound and the feel. That I've got a great anecdote about that. Do you know who? Bonus points to anyone who can come up with the person who said that line. You will never believe it.
I thought it was John Lennon, wasn't it?
No, everyone thinks it was John Lennon. It was actually Jasper Carrott, the comedian. I know. Jasper Carrott came up with that, and it's probably the most used line about Ringo. He's not even the best drummer in the Beatles. He definitely was. Paul was a good musician, but he wasn't a great drummer.
Yeah.
And I can always tell the Paul songs. But I thought Tony was good, and I'm not saying he was like John Bonham or anything, but and sometimes in a band like that, it's all about like the pieces have got to fit and the dynamics got to be right. And at the start, I thought see when you listen to that, because whenever you listen to the second song, yes, the quality of the second album, the quality of the songs on the album go up, and they are you know, they're a wee bit more intricate.
Yeah.
But a lot of the energy and the power is lost. Who am I? I mean, that was one of the biggest selling albums of the 90s, I think, maybe the one. So obviously they know what they're doing. But I just felt, you know, Drummers Union, he maybe deserved a chance in the second record. But I can understand why he wasn't there. But I thought he was really good at the time. I saw them live 2 or 3 times at that point, and it's that thing. It's another sort of old saying about, you know, you only know it's a bad drummer. You know what I mean? If he's playing, he's doing his job, and it's like Charlie Watts, isn't it? It's like that thing where, you know, Charlie was good tonight. That's the old thing. It's like he's the quiet man getting on with it. Anyway,
well, you know, I think on that first album, it sounds like a band, and I think as the band progresses, it's Noel's songs with some amazing musicians behind them. I mean, was it Steve White they get in on drums?
Steve White.
What a drummer he is, but, you know, almost the ultimate session musician. Or same with the guitar players and everything. They build this incredible, but it's not the original band. It's not the band that people really kind of grabbed, you know, hold of them.
Sometimes it can be just something that's simple, a nuanced thing in music, and it's about taste. It's the guy who's like Noel's band. So if Noel wants it to be more like that, and a wee bit more grown up, and a wee bit more like the Beatles, and a wee bit more like, but I think there was time. There was still time for a second. Definitely, maybe, you know, like a wee bit more power to it. I still stand by that. The songs on it are great. I think there's a chapter that me and my pal Tom we sit and we listen to Blur, and then we listen to the second album, and it's just that the Oasis just sort of kick it out of the park. They're just the songs were really good, and it was like development, but there was quite a different dynamic and sound to a real change in the, you know, the oomph and how it sounded on the radio and how it sounded in the CD. But I feel sorry for Tony Hart. I made that clear in the book, but
Absolutely. It's a really interesting way to look at it, because often the other members of the band are overlooked, and of course they change as the band move on. It's interesting to look at the other bands that were there at King Tut's that night, because it's a little microcosm of particularly Glasgow at that time, which was a real indie city. A lot of the bands that were playing were they could be old school indie bands. You've got 18 Wheeler, you've got Boyfriend, these were bands that had been playing that size of venues for a while.
And they were experienced, they were a wee bit older as well, and they had records out,
Yeah.
and they had been playing loads of shows. Boyfriend, particularly that night, were really, really good, really tight. And David Keegan is a friend of ours as well. He's got loads of books out now as well. He's a great writer. He's their band were pretty. I mean, both bands were. Boyfriend they were the headline act because of their records. They had brought an album out. I think it was just 50-50. And that was another reason why McGee showed up to pretend he was on Creation Business. It was actually both bands were actually on an indie imprint, a Creation indie imprint called August, I think. And my pal Dave Barker runs that, and I run that at the time. And they were kind of they were always getting good shows and getting good press and all that. But in fact, I'm halfway through that. There was a wee stammer there, and it's the idea of the author's brain clicked into gear. I'm not sure if 18 Wheeler might have been on. He might have actually been on the big Creation, where his boyfriend were still on. They were definitely in August. But you're right. There was an excitement. There was bands playing every night, and you could go to down to the 13th Note and places like that. There was always indie nights on, and Thursday nights was great. It was Franz Ferdinand, Alex Capranos ran a really cool place and put us on all the time. There was always bands. There's loads of bands that made it from that scene that did well and created it. You're right. There was a real thriving. Maybe I'm just getting older, but I don't know if there's that same energy. Whenever we were wee, your mum and dad were telling you to get a real job and not mess about in bands. Now it's like the mum and dads are all there, and they think their kids are Mozart and Picasso and all that, and they're not. You're like, no.
In bands. Now you talk about a Boyfriend having an album launch. Is it true the album was going to be called, or it was called, Hairy Banjo?
Hairy Banjo was the name of this. Aye.
That's one of the worst album titles.
I don't know what you're inferring here. I'm just out of math.
Again, I'm going back to the school days that we were talking about.
No. We promised to be no swearing.
Well, let's move on. Let's move on for that. Yeah. Now, as I say, there's a chapter called The Lost Art of A&R, and I find that whole side of things fascinating. The most I know about A&R was reading John Niven's Kill Your Friends book, which was all set in that world. It's about so much more than the music. It's about how you can promote these guys, how you can find a way into giving the media coverage and all of those things. And Alan McGee seemed to have that right from the start.
Well, one of the things he was really good at, and I think he's admitted this, he'd go into work, even no matter what state he was in, he would go into work, and he would have an A4 foolscap, and he would write down the 5 or 6 things he had to do that day and score them off. So he would say, get radio airplay for Teenage Fan Club, phone America to get Primal Scream tours confirmed. It was all things like that, and he was often good at getting something to pin something onto it. So if you had a book coming out, he would find a way to get you on Radio Scotland to talk about it, or 5 Live to talk about it, or get you on Talk Sport if it was. But he would have a thing that he would have a network of people that he would know and go to, and he had built up over time he had built up a level of trust with people that knew that what he was doing, especially like Oasis's manager. They got on really, really well, and they were just they trusted each other. The band trusted them, and it was all very old school. I mean, I think it was all the management contract they had was all just signed. It was just all handshake. It was handshake. We'll say later on, I trust you.
Yeah.
So Noel had maybe because he was a wee bit older, but Alan McGee had this real sort of he was kind of a people guy, and if he believed in people, he knew how to manipulate others to get on the radio or in the papers. He could see it. I mean, like that story on the ferry from Amsterdam. Everybody else would say, "Oh God, the band are all arrested. What are we going to do? We've got shows to play." he just thought, press, fantastic, NME, that's another 10,000. That instead of playing King Tut's throughout the UK, they were starting to go up to like 800 seater, and then it happened really quickly over that period. But he was very good at that. I think it was a real skill. And I say sometimes people forget, like, one of the key aspects of A&R, and I hint about it in it, is like, it's like your talent spotting. It almost sounds like antiquated now, but George Martin famously, he wanted the Beatles in. I'm not sure if this is well known, but he wanted the Beatles in as a backing band because he was really jealous of Norrie Paramore, who was the producer at, he had Cliff and the Shadows, and they were raking in the sales, and he really wanted this, but he wanted a really tight rock and roll band with a crooner in front, and he wanted the Beatles to be that band. Then he started to hear them, and then they sat down. It's the famous line about, I don't think much of your tie, George Harrison. He just loved their charm, and he actually, he knew that they were really good, but it was the personalities, because he took time to get to know them. He sat down and he saw a charm in them. He sensed that they could maybe have a breakthrough because of just the way they were. They were good guys and were funny, and the chemistry they had together. And it's really that there's that sort of talent. I mean, whenever you're George Martin and you're running Parlophone, you're really young, you're running Parlophone, you're thinking of business and all that, but then you're thinking, this guy, these guys I gave a chance to out of sympathy because he felt sorry for Brian Epstein. And then they came in and the demo was all right, but he sat them down and gave them a rouse. He said, right, you need to tighten up, you need to get more gear, you need to do this, and we'll sign you if you do all this. Is there anything you think in George Harrison famously said, I don't think much of your tie, and they all went into hysterics. And that was it. That was it for Martin, because he realised, I'm going to enjoy working with these guys and I trust them. So there's it's not just the music, it's personality, it's nature, it's chemistry together, how they're going to get on in America when they're driving the back of a van 800 miles away in 6 hours. It's that kind of thing they don't think like we do. And that's what he was like that night.
I wonder if that was partly what Alan McGee saw that night, was that you had a front man who had this charisma, verging on aggression, who just was almost like, I'll take on the lot. Yeah, the only time I saw Oasis play, I was at the Barras, and it was when they've just had Definitely Maybe out, sold out. They didn't have, they had I Am the Walrus and nothing else in terms of songs to play. So I think they played Live Forever Again, whatever that might be, false memory. But here you had this young guy at the front, who basically went to the front of a packed out Barras, stuck out his chin, shoulders back, and basically come ahead. And he was electric. He was absolutely electric.
They were like that the afternoon that I saw them at Tea in the Park. It was just like, as I said earlier, I wouldn't get to say I was emotional, but I was just so proud of them. I felt proud for that. I was watching them, and they changed gear, they'd upped their game, and suddenly I looked at it and go, oh, that's what McGee saw. I could see it now. Everyone who was there in that afternoon, this was less than a year. I saw them in May, and this was over a year, it would be July. It was Tea in the Park, so but 13 months later, and this was just incredible, the transformation. But it's because we've been playing and rehearsing and tightening up. And it's quite an important thing that I mentioned a lot in the book. In the night of the King Tut's night when I saw them, they were really, really rigid. And sometimes you can be, I try to say to people, sometimes if you're in bands, you can be over-rehearsed. And there's a difference between rehearsing in a rehearsal studio and actually playing in front of an audience.
Yeah.
Whenever the sound man's not paying attention, or whenever your monitor's not working or whatever, you've got to learn to do it. And and then that rigid, you can really notice it when it's like almost like a military exercise playing like it's not. You need to perform. You're here to entertain and all that. And eventually, that you can see that's what happened. That and the fact that they met a guy with a big bag of drugs, I think, on the way up. I won't mention that. The cat with the hat.
But I mean, that Tea in the Park, that was when it was still at Strathclyde, wasn't it?
Yes.
And as you say in the book, and I've heard this mentioned elsewhere, one thing that they almost didn't make it, and also it was just a big deal for them as well.
I think I mentioned, you can't imagine Coldplay making the effort to get there. It was like last minute stuff, and they made it. They came to your town. played loud and chased the boys for a fight and chased the girls, and just that kind of old-fashioned rock and roll band. But that was the persona and the image. I mean, I'm sure there was a wee bit of that going on, but most of it was, they were just good guys. I've got really good reports back from loads of people, particularly Derek Deedy, that put us on the guest list. He's got great stories about Liam and his kindness, and so is there's a great line to Debbie, the other girl who was involved with the band that Brick brought them up, and she met. I don't know if you maybe going to mention this, but she was the last time I said to her in an interview I did with her, when was the last time you saw Liam? Or no, she goes, well, I don't really see no, but I saw Liam a few times, and the last time I spoke, he saw me. He was surrounded by security guards, and he saw me, and he said, "Oh, Debbie!" And he started shouting at her. He's waving over. He goes, "Thanks very much, your check's in the post." That was a terrible accent. But he said the check's in the post, and then he sort of thumbs up, like laughing.
Yeah,
but basically was saying, "Thanks very much."
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was at Stone Roses gig, I think.
And it also helps their mythology as well. That all this mythology about that, as you say, Monday night quiet gig, as it actually was, has kind of fitted in with, Dylan in Manchester, or even the Sex Pistols at the Free Trade Hall, where again, apparently hardly anyone in the room listened to it.
They mentioned that in the book, and the price of the tickets and everything.
There's an interesting tour they do with the band Whiteout, and I went to see Whiteout quite a few times at the time.
Brilliant band.
Absolutely fantastic band from Greenock. And when they started this tour together, Whiteout were the headliners, is that right?
Yep, they were the band that the NME had as the ones to watch and all that. Oasis, nothing. And
then halfway through the tour, I don't know how the conversation went, but it was Oasis are going to headline this.
It was common sense, I think, because they were getting press and they were getting news. They were getting a lot of. I'm not sure if their records were, but there was a change, and they thought it might make more sense because everyone was there. But I think, without being crude about it, I think that the vibe was that everyone was there for a fight because the very first night of that tour, they decided to stay in a hotel, a cheap hotel in England somewhere, and it was just chaos. And from that moment on, the music press were following them because it was so bad. Yeah. And then because the music press were following them, the dynamic changed, and the profile changed, and it's like it all kicked off. It's very funny at this time of the day trying to keep it all polite and find the right words to. Everyone knows what I'm trying to say. That wee bit of their career was quite chaotic, and they were starting to really enjoy themselves. But they were able. I mean, McGee says this quite a lot as well. They were one of the few bands that could actually partake in recreational drink, drugs, whatever, but really, really play. Yeah. And it's not something we should condone or anything, but as somebody who's been on and played the drums after a few beers, I mean, a few bottles of bud, and you can feel it affecting your feet and your knees, and you're just imagine when they were, especially when we get to the show they played in the USA in front of all the top, the Whiskey a Go-Go, in front of all the top guys that could change their career. Anyway, so the Whiteout changed, and Whiteout they were a great band, as you say, from Greenock, looked the part, had great songs, a great drummer. They had a vibe about them, and they were the ones that they looked the part. They looked like a classic. You could imagine them in the front of NME and smash hits and all that. And Oasis weren't. Oasis just weren't, but Oasis were ripping it up, Yeah. Where their lead singer was leading the way, and the big brother was writing the songs.
My turn to have a bit of an aside. I was in Thailand in 1995, and I went to Bangkok Tower Records, and Whiteout's album Bite It was number 7 in the charts, which really surprised me how these bands had travelled. But some of these bands really did make an impact overseas.
I think there was a time with the kind of a Stone Roses-y time. I think was it Silvertone they were on?
Yeah.
I think they were on Silvertone. And they were doing well. They were really, They just seemed like the band most likely to. You know how one time whenever you're young and you're at school and you're playing the school team, there's one wee guy who's just like Pelly. It's just one wee guy who's like Messi, you know, and you're like, oh, jeez, oh, right? And you're maybe even worse though if you're playing against them. But that's what they were like. They were the band that's so obvious that it was going to happen for them. And it was a good thing. Sorry, I was going to say one more important thing.
Yeah, sure.
Another important thing that they did very early on in their career was get them on tours with bands like that, so that they had a better, better venues, better sound men, a better back line, like amps and all that, and guys doing monitors and getting them stage friendly and getting them more relaxed, so that they played loads of good shows with loads of great bands. Like a lot higher. I mean, maybe people playing like 800, 1,200 arenas, just like, but out in loads and loads of bands, and they got them play their shows. They weren't headlining. They weren't doing a lot of headline acts. They were actually the support band, and they were learning their stagecraft, which was crucial for the next few years. They really, really, that was a difference when I saw them from the night I saw them when they got the promise of a record deal and shook hands on it and all that to the show at T in the Park.
And the backdrop to this, what happens is what became known as Britpop and all that, which again is a kind of media construct rather than anything else, and a kind of London-centric media construct. So here's this band from Manchester who kind of never fit in that, really. The whole Camden scene and all that stuff that was kind of central to it. Do you think they would have happened without that anyway?
I think it definitely helped.
It almost did happen despite it, I think.
It helped sales, but I think they would have probably done it anyway. I think the idea they put them up against Blur was quite clever, I thought. And at the time, I was probably more a Blur fan. I absolutely loved the first two albums, especially Modern Life Was Rubbish.
Yeah.
And I mentioned that in the book. Yeah. It's a great record. It's just like they're fed up in a tour in America. They start listening to Kinks tapes and all that, and start writing songs about cricket and all that. And just in trains and everything. Just the way a writer should or an artist should. But I thought they were the ones that were, they would at one point they were the big band. They were the big band, and then Oasis came into it. And I think that would happen. But the idea of Britpop really annoyed McGee initially, I think, and their management and all that, because they didn't. Marcus Russell, it was famously he's on record as saying it's too small-minded. We want to be big in the USA, we want to be big in Japan, we want to be big. That was the name of a band, wasn't it? So they had all these different ambitions for them, and they felt it. Even they used to always put stickers on it as well. Britpop, when they hated it. Well, I think they liked it whenever they were in the Music 10 and all that. With that, but that was just a great time for music, because there's a great quote by McGee. These are these bands that have came out of the played small venues and put in the work, and they've played up and down the UK. They've played everywhere. They're playing shows. They're built up. They came from like the indie scene, crossed over into the mainstream, and now they're in the news. It's a great story. But I'm going into detail about that as well. It's very interesting how that all occurred, and all the different points of views from that as well. I wasn't sure. I didn't like the Britpop thing either. I thought it was a wee bit limiting, but it's what we all talk about. I think that's why people are nostalgic for it now. I think at the time, people who were in bands and knew a wee bit about how it kind of worked were a wee bit nonplussed by that. But now, looking back, I think people see me. They've got that sort of warm coziness about it all, but still a wee bit. I'm with you. I think really. And
the attempts to kind of break America are interesting as well, because they go from being big fish in the British pond to suddenly not being so big in there and having to almost go from scratch again. And they don't, well, certainly I think Liam doesn't have the patience for that. It's almost like, do you not know who I am? And they go, the answer to that is no, not really.
I should put that in the book. It's actually a wee bit more dramatic than that. To give Oasis out, I had to look at their QC now. I put it to you. No, they went from being in Japan, where they were like treated like the Beatles. Yeah. I think that's important to underline. And they went from playing all these. They played maybe 6 or 7 shows, but they were like the kings of rock and roll, and they were the Beatles, and they absolutely loved them. The venues they played were huge, and they were like stars. And then they come back and they played in America, and no one knew who they were. Nobody was interested, and it was just plenty of guys that were not interested, that were at the bar trying to get a beer and a burger and all that. And they're like, what? And then it was maybe just a few of the cognoscenti over there, a few of the sort of the indie dash sort of the guys that were into their music. We kind of were there to see them, but they were playing shows we're back to sort of playing King Tut's clubs. Good clubs though.
I was in America briefly around about that period, and folk who owned and were into record shops knew them, and they were really into them. But your ordinary punter, maybe not so much.
It was just promoters, and it was guys that were doing shows like Moe's and the Satchicon, was it? There's like famous sort of venues in America that you play like 400 to 600, and they were getting ignored, and no one knew that they had to go and do that, and their management knew they had to go and do that. You have to, like U2, I mentioned U2 in it because they were at the same point. At one point they were doing really well in Europe and over to America, and they basically reset it and start again. And they started again by going over 3 times a year, just blocking out 6 weeks over to America, playing all these shows, and that's what they needed to do. But they didn't have. It's a bit rude to say it, but I don't think Noel could do it, but and a few other guys. But Liam, his ego was injured, but it was because he came from this huge sort of career changing sort of. And Japan is like an incredible place. I've never been, but I read a lot of books about it. Anyway, so they have this sort of incredible time over there. Again, very early in the morning to be getting into detail about it, but they're living the dream, put it that way. They were signing on less than a year ago, and now this is happening to them. They're just guys for a housing scheme, and they're just having a great time. They're tearing it up, and then everyone's loving them, and they're getting away with murder everywhere. They're just going for it. And then America, and then poof, and then they had to start. They didn't have the patience or the mentality, maybe, or I don't know.
It's really interesting to compare them with U2, as you say, because the Rattlin' Hum period with the film and all that is the most craven attempt to say to America, love me, love me. They're turning the backsides off, but they're buying the cowboy hats, they're buying the cowboy boots, they're playing with B.B. King, and you just can't imagine.
No, it was Rattlin' Hum, and it was rubbish, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But
you can't imagine them doing that. You can't imagine Oasis going, oh yeah, we're going to, so ashamedly say we understand you, whereas they just seem they didn't.
I just think that there are other bands like that as well. I remember the Police went out to America in a van and kept all they actually got a van over there, bought a second-hand van, bought second-hand amps, drums, and just went along and played. They just started playing venues. They would show up and see if they could play, and they'd blow the place off, and then they garner press. Teenage Fan Club did something similar in the New Music Seminar in New York. One of the reasons why I ended up in a band was because of Gordon Keane, who was in the band with the BMX Bandits, and Eugene was in it at the time, and they were forming this band Captain America, and they were looking for a drummer. And I was, at this point, I was seriously considering I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to write. And I started sort of writing plays and writing stuff and a few ideas, and I was really into it. And I was getting old. I was 24, I think, 24, 25 maybe. And same age as Kurt. So I think I was the only one that was the same age as them. They were all older. I think it's the only band I've ever been in. I was the youngest. So anyway, no getting that now. This is important. This is what happens when you go. So we're out, they're working, and then Gordon's like, I don't believe Norman and the guys, they're out in America at New Music Seminar, and they've hired a van, and they're going out and they're playing shows. I couldn't believe this. I couldn't believe this. This is guys that you saw in the Hat Rig a year ago, and so they were just sort of haphazardly sort of getting their stuff together, and then suddenly we knew that they were getting a wee bit better, and we heard all these stories. But that always stuck in my head, and then I thought, and every time I'd meet Gordon, he's like, we're looking for a drummer, and they gave me a demo tape. But I had never had a rehearsal when I played my first show with them. I just showed that. The drummer didn't show up. It was Brendan from Teenage Fan Club was a drummer who was helping out. And he didn't show up, and I had to go on stage without any rehearsal or anything like that. And just to help them. I didn't want to do it, but I made myself do it. And I always say to people now, a lot of times, there is a point to this, by the way, a lot of times when situations occur like that, always try and do it, because you never know. I did that night and ended up touring with Nirvana and writing a book about it, and meeting Kurt, playing drums on stage with Dave Grohl and all that, which is just bizarre, isn't it? It's bizarre for things like that to happen to you. And I always say to kids and all that, whenever if I'm asked to talk to kids at schools and all that, I think they come to me as the sort of the fit guy that sort of fell through the net educational wise, but sort of scrapped my way through, just sort of navigating through things. They always ask, and I always say to people, if you get asked to go and help somebody out, always try and do it. Another time I was playing the drums up in the drop-in centre in Airdrie, very briefly, and I was playing the drums as hard as I could. There was this band called Blue Cheer. You ever heard of Blue Cheer?
No.
They were a psychedelic band, really loud drums and guitars, and me and my pal Tom again, we were this band. It was called Riffarama.
I remember that, yeah.
Well, Riffarama, no, you'll probably remember the Thrum album called Riffarama.
The Thrum album, you're right.
Yes,
yeah.
So we changed the name to Boomerang, right? But it was basically just me and Tom, and I was hitting the drums like a Captain Caveman, and it was the loudest I ever remember playing the drums. And we got asked to turn it down because Ian Patterson was next door,
right,
doing a book group thing, and he said, "Can you please stop?" And I said, okay. And I was like, in like a shot here, we had to say about comedy because that's what I was into doing. And I went in, and then I ended up getting a break. He gave me a break that day, and that's how I ended up doing. So you if you're in doing something, stay involved in it and keep doing it, because things happen. If you do things, if you make it happen, something else will come off it. It's always been like that for me, and I'm just an accidental. I'm just sort of fluky with things. But I mean, I've got this is my 10th book, I think. It's definitely 10, but the concept of it all is pretty much like Oasis. It's just dare to dream and just ignore it, because I was in a situation where because I was into football, and I wrote for All an Excuse and Off the Ball for years, and I used to be in bands. So because I did football, all the indie kids thought I was Neddy. Because I was in an indie band at one point, all the football guys all thought I was Neddy. So I was like, what have I done wrong? It's just weird. It's a weird thing to be involved in. Always, one of my pals that writes for the Herald said, "I know what you do," and I go, "Oh, tell me." He goes, and he put it brilliantly. I always try to remember. He said, "You deal with the cultural intersection of football, comedy, and music." I I'm going to steal that, and that's it. If you tell people that, it goes, "Oh, that makes sense."
That's not a bad place to be either. That's fantastic. And I would love to talk to you more about Captain America and your adventures with Nirvana. That's a separate podcast, I think.
Yes, we could do that.
For another time.
Pencil in a week for that one.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Andy, we could talk forever. I know I've not even mentioned the importance of Johnny Marr and various other people as well. But before we finish up, we haven't even spoken about the Resurrection that's currently going on, which is part of the book, the Resurrection.
I know.
Are you going to see them? Was that something you'd be interested in?
Well, I had a chance to go and see them in Dublin, but friends are going over to that, but I've got a wedding to go to, so I managed to get it. To be honest, I don't want to see them. I'm
the same, by the way. I can't think of anything worse for me to go into one of these massive.
I feel as if I've saw their whole set a couple of times on YouTube. I was very keen to see. I was well on them to do well, and glad that they're doing well. But I think it'll be fine. I think the actual shape of the band that they got, I mentioned in the book, one of the shapes that they had in the band in about 2005, 2006. They did 2 massive US tours and world tours with a grown-up band, and that's mostly who are with them, apart from Bonehead and the drummer, who's a great drummer. He's played with Beck and REM and all that. He's a really good drummer. So I think they'll be fine, but it's just a wee bit too perfect for me to say that. Yeah. So I hope it goes well for them. But no, I'm not. I'm happy to give it a miss as well.
Yeah, me too. Andy, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Alistair, and thanks for listening to me.
Absolutely fascinating. And what I will say to people is, yes, by all means, come and read about Oasis, but you'll get so much more. You'll get a lot of the personal anecdotes that you've given us, Andy. So I really appreciate that.
Been fun. Thank you very much, Alistair. Cheers.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.